Did you see that in a movie too?
Actually, yeah. But a different one. See, there's a sequel. Wasn't as good.
I gotta admit, I'm pretty impressed. Graphically, The Last of Us Part 2 is still among one of the best looking games out there. At times, it even looks better than real life. You know a game is good when you can leave footprints in the snow. I mean, look at this. The gameplay is by far some of the best in any shooter game ever. In the first game, you play as a 50-year-old man, so you move like one. In The Last of Us 2, you are playing as an agile 19-year-old stealth assassin Rambo.
Bad idea, Kurt.
Obviously, Ellie doesn't have the same raw strength that Joel does, so it's important that they double down on the stealth elements. And this is hands down the most brutal game I've ever played. You can stab their neck, use a shotgun and it obliterates their face. You can use a sniper rifle for long distance, throw a snowball at a little kid, you can use a revolver, you can shoot off their leg and watch them scream for their friends. An explosive bow and arrow. A landmine. A Molotov. You can throw a stun grenade, grab one, and then go John Wick style. And I just have a big ass smile on my face while doing it. But enough about the gameplay and graphics, because it's really the story that intrigues me the most. Before I played The Last of Us 2 for myself last year, I actually knew roughly what the story was about. Joel gets his head caved in by a golf club, Ellie gets mad and kills 100 people to get revenge on the person who killed Joel. Then right at the climax of the story, the timeline resets and now you play as the person who killed Joel. And I, like many people, went, what the fuck? Despite knowing all of this though, when it came to me sitting down and experiencing the game myself, I was still so invested. And in retrospect, I think a lot of the bold risks the game took work for a few reasons. Kind of. I have played The Last of Us Part 2 3 times. I have played this game from all the critical perspectives you could have. I played it as a pessimist, and I played this game from an optimistic point of view. And what I gathered from this is this. The Last of Us Part 2 is all about perspective. That's the key theme to the story and what it's trying to tell. It revolves around perspective. Literally, you play Ellie's perspective on the path of vengeance and regret, killing hundreds of motherfuckers in your way, and you play in Abby's perspective, where you discover a path of redemption and the humanity to those you kill as Ellie, changing your perspective of Abby as a villain, depending on who you ask.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Ellie's perspective is Abby's perspective up until she gets her revenge on Joel. And Abby's perspective is Joel's perspective from the first game. And Abby and Joel are kind of the same. Both lost someone close to them, both became hate-filled individuals who isolate themselves from others, and both learn to become better people while adventuring with a teenage child. And both have pasts that eventually come back to haunt them, which leads me into my main gripe with the story, which is not Joel's death itself, which anyone with a brain knew would eventually happen.
It's called luck. And it is gonna run out.
You ain't gonna make it.
But the execution of Joel's death and what led up to it is still largely not as well executed as it could have been, in my opinion. Let me explain. Part of what led to so much criticism was the order of perspectives that we see. First, it's the day of Ellie's patrol. Then we play as Abby. Then Joel dies. Then we see flashbacks of Ellie cutting off Joel after finding out about the Fireflies.
I won't let you take her. This is our future. Think of all the lives we'll save.
Then Jesse gets shot, and then we play as Abby again, then back as Ellie. Then we see the night before Joel's death, where she agrees to accept his apology. And gamers are not exactly the smartest individuals, me included. So instead of going at it like Pulp Fiction, a restructuring of these events would have helped rather than hindered. Games are long. This game is 25 to 30 hours. You can rewatch Pulp Fiction, which is a little over 2 hours, but not everyone is willing to replay a 25-hour game. Listen, the thing about games that separates them from other media is you actually get to play and control the characters. So in saying that, it would have been wise not to sideline one of the most interesting and beloved characters of all time at the start of the game. I think give Joel one last hurrah, taking out hordes of infected, saving what he thinks are innocent survivors. Because you gotta remember that this is a different Joel than the one we play as in the first game. Because you gotta remember that this is the day after Ellie finally accepts Joel's apology. Because you gotta remember that he is a seasoned veteran of the apocalypse, but he had his mind so focused on rekindling his relationship with his surrogate daughter that he forgot what led him to survive this long in the first place.
Well, what about the guy?
He ain't even hurt.
And then splat. But having you play as Abby at the beginning, tricking the player into leading a beloved character into their own slaughter was a bold choice but a bad one in my opinion, which made gamers really angry. And we all know what happens when gamers get angry. I feel like something that goes rather unnoticed about this game is that, at least to me, it's about reinforcing Joel's choice from the first game. And that it was the right one. And we see this through both Abby's and Ellie's perspectives. When Ellie begins her hunt for Abby, she is thrusted into the middle of a war between a local indigenous population that hides amongst the bushes and trees, against a highly equipped military force with trained soldiers and professional marksmen. It's through this experience that Ellie gradually learns that humanity never deserved a cure, because all it would reinforce is more war and death. There's a part in Seattle where Ellie comes across a mural of a figure who was looked at as a religious messiah to the scars, but all her paintings touch is just justifications for evil and violence. But would Ellie and the cure not be the same? Would it not just be used for more fighting, more war? My interpretation is that humanity would never have been saved because it never deserved to have been saved, because we are selfish in our pursuits. Joel's own choice proves this, but it's the same with Marlene. She selfishly robbed Ellie of her own choice. But only then does Ellie realize that Joel made the choice anyone else would have made.
If it was me, I'd want you to do the surgery.
The human choice. Abby's perspective takes a slightly different approach. Abby's a part of the WLF, or Wolves, and they're at a territorial war with the Seraphites, which they label the Scars. Abby and the WLF have a perspective driven by hate to those they are fighting. They see them as nothing more than animals and savages, without realizing that they themselves are just as bad, if not worse. Their leader, Isaac, is going to commit complete genocide on the Seraphite island.
God damn it, he's just a kid!
You have 3 seconds to get away from that scar.
Abby even says this when they are discussing an event which kickstarted a war between them.
We let our guard down, and they strung up an entire squad.
That was in retaliation to us shooting those kids.
Okay, but those kids attacked our guys.
Manny, they're kids. It's not their fault.
Not our fault either. Those deaths are on them.
How can you get someone to completely hate someone, then learn their perspective and ultimately move on from that hatred? The game wants you to hate this character, it wants you to kill her. But it then wants you to question your own thoughts about her and understand her perspective. I believe that was what Neil Stuckman attempted to achieve with Abby with the player. Again, I think the order of perspectives that we see, along with the long nature of this story, doesn't help this. The player spends 12 hours mowing down waves of enemies as Ellie, then switches and plays another 12 hours as Abby. But let's talk about Abby for a bit. It's through Abby's experience where she learns to break down the hateful demeanor which until this point she had been driven by. After she gets her revenge on Joel, she is still haunted by the day she witnessed firsthand the aftermath of Joel's rampage at the hospital. Throughout the game, it continues to show us this nightmare, but through her experience of saving Lev and Yara, her nightmare eventually turns into a dream, where she can see her father's face for the first time in years, resulting in Abby rebelling against the WLF and aiding Yara and Lev's escape. A selfless act, not a selfish one. But it's really the ending, when Ellie and Abby's stories collide one last time. Does it become clear what the story was really, truly about? It was never a story of revenge. It was really a story about forgiveness. When Abby killed Joel, it is revealed to us at the end of the game that Abby just robbed Ellie's chance to forgive him for what he did to the Fireflies. It's like in Spider-Man 3, Sandman killed Uncle Ben and robbed Peter Parker's chance to apologize to his uncle.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Fuck out of the way! I can't see!
And then gets consumed by vengeance.
What does it matter to you anyway?
Throws a grenade at his friend's face. Then slaps his girlfriend. Shutting out all in his life that cared about him. And like in Spider-Man, Ellie's quest for revenge was an outlet of her own guilt, constantly alienating those closest to her in her selfish pursuit of revenge. So when the beach fight happens, they tussle, and she forces Abby to fight her so that maybe avenging Joel's death will allow her to move on, but she lets her go. And changes her mind after going through all of this for no apparent reason. It's left almost intentionally subtle as to why Ellie did this. But here's what I think. Ellie probably saw how much of herself she had lost and was willing to kill a little malnourished Asian boy to force Abby to fight. And in a sense, it is a similar scenario to when Abby was beating the ever-living shit out of Joel, forcing Ellie to watch. Ellie probably realized this, and after seeing Joel's face in the last good memory she has of him, lets Abby go, unwilling to repeat the cycle, allowing Ellie to finally move on. I think this is what it means, but there is a problem with this. The conflicting nature of this game's story about perspective and the player paired with the illusion of choice with the gameplay creates a, well, conflicting nature. I can definitely see why a lot of people didn't like this, forcing the player to play as the person you were trying to kill after they killed the person you were playing as for the whole game before it, mowing down waves of enemies that could also have had their own Joel or Dina, only to not kill the one person you wanted to kill. Why would it make any difference? When you play on harder difficulties such as Grounded, you are incentivized to focus more on stealth, as you both have only one fucking bullet, but can also actually sneak past about 80% of the combat encounters. But there are still instances that force you to do bad things. This is why largely, I think The Last of Us 2 is a story that was never meant to be a video game, as providing a sensuous experience like watching a show from a distance provides that disconnect between character action and perspective that controlling the dual characters in this video game largely doesn't capitalize on. Watching Ellie beat the shit out of Nora or kill a woman with a bebe on the way is very different than manipulating the player into doing so. In a way, the game's central theme of perspective contradicts itself in this manner, as a story that is so focused on perspective at times it fails to show the important perspectives that would make the story much more airtight and concise. Despite all of this though, just because it's not the story I wanted doesn't immediately mean that it sucks. I think the story The Last of Us Part 2 is trying to tell was a pretty great one. A story in which its central message seems more relevant now more than ever. And I don't think there will ever be a game, or hell, even a story that has impacted me and stuck with me quite as much as this game did. Or a story that took as many bold risks as this game's story did. So anyway, that's my thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2. So, what's your perspective?